Hello and welcome to This Is Cohousing, the Cohousing podcast. I'm Charles Durrett, author and principal architect at the Cohousing Company. Today's episode, we're discussing a broad and philosophical take on cohousing and the beginnings of a cohousing, starting this cohousing that we did in a little town of 3,000 people with my guest, Carl Hall. Carl is a retired professor of philosophy and helped many a student understand the difference between priori and posteriori. And he's also an astute observer of people's behavior and a resident of Nevada City Cohousing for the last 20 years. And while I'm certain that details about living a cohousing, even starting a cohousing community, will come to the forefront, we will also seep into conversations about the philosophical, bigger picture. And we're going to address big questions like, does cohousing contribute? Does it move the dial forward? Carl taught philosophy for how many years, Carl?
34 years.
34 years. He taught philosophy. And I love to chat with him at common dinners. Welcome, Carl.
Oh, thank you very much, Chuck. I'm glad to be here.
We really appreciate you being here very much.
Yeah.
So, when and how did you first hear about cohousing, Carl?
In the early 90s, we were living in Marysville, Yuba City, and it was when Muir Commons was first developed, the first cohousing community in the United States. That was just about 40 miles south of where we were living, and we read an article about it in the local newspaper, became interested, wondered what it was all about, went to our library, and they had a copy of your book, which we'd read, and became really jazzed about the whole idea of living in an intentional community. In fact, so much so that in 1995, Ellen and I went to New Mexico to look at some property with a group of people that were forming Southwest Sufi community. We would have liked to have lived there, but it was too far away from our family and too far away from my place of employment at the time. We read an article in the local newspaper that said you and Katie were going to start a co-housing project in Nevada City. And we thought, oh, this sounds good. It sounds like it's probably got a great chance of actually happening. So Nevada City Cohousing came along to rescue us. There was a meeting at the library, and I was the first person to give Katie a check for the group formation workshop, and the rest is history.
Therefore, your house was number 2 pick, right?
Yeah.
Ours was number 1, right? Cool. What did you think after you moved in?
I would say the first feeling was one of relief because we had sold our house 6 months prior. We had house sat about 25 different houses, the last one of which was a converted miner's shack, which had horrible insulation. And we spent most of the winter of 2005-06 freezing our butts off. And when we finally moved in to our new house, which was radiantly heated, it was like this tremendous relief. It was also a relief because it followed the whole process of group formation and design and getting the project approved by the city. So it was wonderful to move in.
Well, speaking of the difficulties, what were some of those difficulties getting the project approved and transitioning from design and development?
We had a lot of meetings. That's one thing that sticks out for me is that all the meetings we had to get the group organized, to figure out what it is we wanted to do, how it was going to happen. And I really appreciated how you and Katie had set up a pretty step-by-step process by which all the issues that needed to be addressed got addressed. And then the thing that surprised me the most was getting our project approved by the city. We had some strong opposition from both the mayor and the city planning commission. And I had this sort of ideal vision that, oh, if you want to build something, you conform to the zoning requirements and then it gets approved. But this turned out to be much more of a political process. As somebody recently said, our city has a preservationist machine. And I think their basic goal was to keep things as they are And we represented a sizable impact on the population of the city. And we had to get around that preservationist machine.
The projects slated for this site before ours were all declined because of that preservationist machine. And they were pretty set on stopping our project. They were pretty set on stopping everything, and actually have been very successful over the years. But it was pretty difficult to stop a co-housing because all the future residents are playing a big role in lobbying for the community to be built over and over again, to the point where it became obvious that really all they needed to say is, "Why wouldn't you approve this?" But, there was just enough residents in Nevada City who were used to getting their way, but they didn't stop this project. I'm very happy about that. Okay, so Carl, you've been living there for 20 years. What challenges has our community faced that we never anticipated in the initial process of development? How has the community responded to those challenges?
Yeah, I think the one that comes immediately to mind is the pandemic.
Mm.
I mean, we had been in existence for 14 years when COVID hit. And of course, as an intentional community, our basic way of functioning is social connection. And COVID interfered with that. It really changed that a lot. And so we had to figure out ways to get around it. All our HOA meetings became Zoom meetings, committee meetings, the same. And I think the thing that affected the most were the common meals. And I think we're still, in some sense, recovering from that. We simply couldn't have common meals, especially during the height of the pandemic. As it began to ease, we began to have common meals outdoors. But I think that was one of the most powerful, unanticipated things. The other thing is the impact of climate change on our community in two ways. First of all, we have a lot of trees on our 11-acre property, ponderosa pines that are subject to bark beetle infestation. And we had to spend a lot of money to take down dead trees to prevent possible damage to our buildings, hazards to people, and so forth. Also, we're designated as a high risk fire area, so our fire insurance has gone up in ways that we didn't anticipate. And now we've got a lot of fundamental changes happening within the larger society that I think are going to affect us.
I'm so glad that we're surviving those things with neighbors that we can trust and share with and cooperate. Cooperation is one of the default behaviors at Nevada City Cohousing. That's one of the things I appreciate. When we needed to get a new quote for the insurance, others in town were going from 1 to 2,000 per year to 6 or 7,000 per year. And we were less than 1,000 per year for 5 years. And now we're up to about, what are we, about 2,000 per year
Something
per
like that.
household. And we're dealing with the global warming issue too. We're right in the middle of the Tahoe National Forest. So we're surrounded by trees, and there's tons and tons of places where a forest fire could begin. And yet I feel like we're intelligently getting fire safe. How has co-housing made a difference in your personal life, Carl?
Ah, well, first of all, I consider myself a classic introvert. I basically enjoy being by myself. And so moving into an intentional community definitely represented a shift for me. And I think the way it's affected me the most is that I've become much more sensitive to how other people function. Not everybody has the same style of decision making or taking action that I do. Sometimes those differences have led to various feelings of unease between people. I've heard this analogy a while back. If you want to polish rocks, you throw them into a tumbler and you put a little bit of good grit in there and you tumble them around and they bang against each other and they sort of soften their sharp edges. And I think that's what happens in co-housing. Over time, especially over 20 years, I've come to really appreciate how these different styles add to the community and how we can function together, even if we don't always do it in the same way. And so it's really enriched my life. It's made me a lot more sensitive and I think flexible in terms of dealing with other people because our whole focus is let's make this community work.
And I will say that you and your lovely wife are sages in our community. In other words, you guys are great at making an argument that most people can figure out. It carries the day, basically, one way or the other. Thank you for that. Co-housing, by definition, helps one create a custom neighborhood. One of the reasons that we're doing it that way is because the co-housing process fundamentally asks us to look at who our culture is, and then secondly, ask us where do we want to take our culture. We did the best we could to modify our culture so that it better suit our individual needs and our needs for community. For example, one of our first goals in the site design was to allow for spontaneous socializing, which is different than most of Nevada County, where your telephone and your date book pretty much run your social life. And where we live, you can walk out your front door and there's plenty of community, and you can sit in your backyard and there's plenty of privacy. But all that said, where do you feel like the current culture still influences your life more than you would like it to?
Well, first of all, I see our current culture as fundamentally unstable. I would say I'm definitely pessimistic about the future. I believe we're kind of at the end of an era that began with the Enlightenment period, our belief in science as a source of knowledge, the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and now AI and automation. I think we've been moving in a direction that does not tend to support community, doesn't tend to support a sense of we belong to each other, we're meant to work together, we're meant to live in harmony with each other. Instead, it's cultivated what some people call a culture of separation, where I'm over here, you're over there, this is mine, that's yours. I believe this, you believe that. And this doesn't create the kind of atmosphere which brings people together. So for me, co-housing is kind of a sanctuary from what's happening in the external world. And what seems to be happening rapidly now is just plugging into our individual little screens that really take our attention away from other people. So the fact that in co-housing, when I walk through the door, I'm undoubtedly going to run into my neighbors. And it's a chance to connect, to say hi, to find out how they're doing. Most people don't have that kind of day-to-day interaction. And so I'm thinking that co-housing represents a model for how we ought to be living our lives.
I read yesterday that in 2005, based on a couple of research institutions in the US, the average American was talking to other people about 16,600 words a day. And in 2020, it's now less than 12,000 a day. That kind of ties into what you're saying. And the researchers had this conclusion that 16,000 wasn't too many, but between merchants and neighbors and so many other opportunities to just chat with people, which the merchants is really diminishing because you can just buy it online. There's so many things you can do online that you don't have to talk to people in line anymore, that it's diminishing our ability to actually communicate and relate to others, especially strangers.
I just believe it represents an environment in which human beings can really experience being human, which, as Aristotle said, we're social animals and we're meant to interact with other people. We're meant to connect in ways that co-housing allows us to connect.
Are there other places that you see co-housing as an antidote to some of the challenges the world seems to be struggling with?
Not only the fact that it creates a social connection between people, But our footprint on planet Earth, I think, is much more modest than if you look at a typical suburban tract.
Well, as a philosophy teacher, which thinkers do you think deeply informed your views and larger views about how cooperative spirit and a cooperative capacity for working together in society at large? But the reason I bring that up is because, after 55 projects, I've noticed over and over again that at first blush, when we start with a new co-housing project, there's so much emphasis on the individual. I want that thing. As a culture, we're very focused on things. But there's some places like Denmark where cooperation was given the benefit of the doubt in like the 1850s when a philosopher named Grundtvig introduced the concept that if you're a farmer with 10 cows, you better cooperate with nine other farmers to have 100 cows with so that you can buy grain at the same price that the farmer with 100 cows is buying the grain at. Now, can you think of other thinkers, other philosophers who have promoted cooperation successfully?
Not so much in terms of looking at it from a societal perspective. Well, for me, I think of it in terms of people that have promoted, again, intentional community as a way of cooperating. The thinkers that have influenced me the most are those that ask some very basic questions about what it means to be human and how being human really involves opening to our connection to other human beings. There's a fundamental question which I sometimes ask people, which is, do you belong? What is your sense of belonging? And I think a lot of people would have some questions about how deeply they belong to their world, their neighbors, to society at large. And the philosophers that most influenced me come out of the Buddhist tradition that would say this notion of having a separate self existence is really an illusion. None of us have a separate self existence. We are what we are because of the relations we have with the world around us. And therefore, cooperation is a necessary part of our own growth and development as human beings. And that's, again, where I find co-housing most beneficial.
I'm working with a group in Texas right now to help them imagine a world where cooperation gets the benefit of the doubt. We get the benefit of the doubt, as opposed to me, which is the American way, no doubt about it. Although Gabor Mate would argue that we've only been isolating ourselves quite effectively in the last 2 minutes of the last hour of human existence. If
Yeah.
you looked at the trajectory of Homo sapiens, it's been like the last 2 minutes. And if you look at the trajectory of Homo erectus, it's been the last 2 seconds
Mm.
that we've been separated. So it doesn't speak volumes about our trajectory for survival. I mean, basically, every animal's first priority is to survive. I get that. But our species is special in that it requires each other to survive. It needs a social element. And the shortest poem in the English language is me, comma, we. And every time you read the interpretation, it alludes to the fact that I personally can't reach my potential unless we reach our potential. I see it happening in co-housing all the time. And I see groups like ours where the sharing option, like we only have one lawnmower for 34 houses, is the only smart option. And we see that over and over again. But it took us a little while to get there, but we were kind of there before we even moved in, actually.
That transition from me to we, I think, is absolutely fundamental. What happens with human beings, as far as I know, is that we wake up to our own being. We're able to say, I am here. And then we're kind of puzzled by what's out there. And sometimes people get stuck in the I am here part without actually connecting with what's out there. The worst case scenario is malignant narcissism, where somebody is so wrapped up in their own world that they simply can't connect with another human being to the point where they have this realization, oh, we actually belong together. I think there's a curious thing about the English grammatical language that the pronoun I, we call the first person singular. The pronoun we call the first person plural. Normally, we don't think of we as a person, but in fact, when you really get connected with someone, what emerges is this sense that, oh, beyond the I that I think I am, there is this we that embraces me with you. And that transition from me to we, I think, is absolutely crucial. And again, co-housing provides the medium through which people can discover that we connection. But I do think you're right. I think our society is pathologically obsessed with looking out for number one, looking out for my interests as opposed to yours. There's no such thing as a win-win situation. If you win, I lose. That's a really toxic way of looking at
Yeah,
things.
every project I start now, one of my first slides shows that the purpose of argument is to not win or lose, but to find the best solution. And it seems to be working over and over.
Yeah, and we talk about serendipity, the fact that you have a group of people talking about an issue or problem, it really creates an atmosphere in which a surprising result can emerge that nobody's thought about. Again, cooperation, I think, leads to those kind of surprising insights.
I mean, I argue that co-housing math, basic co-housing math is 1 plus 1 equals 3. I have an idea, you have an idea, and the third one that we come up with together is the better one.
Right. Right.
And that's been my experience
Yeah.
by and large. Along those lines, to accomplish that, it seems like there's a couple of skills that are somewhat essential for people considering moving into co-housing, and I'd like to hear what you think about it. Fundamentally, number one skill is how to listen. And I can remember a couple people in our group dropping out early because they just realized I'm not a good listener. But also, I've decided that being able to read helps too, because if you come to the table and you don't have much concept of co-housing and other people do, they're ready to get rolling. And while you're getting over thinking about yourself, it helps to have had a little bit of introspective take on it and think in terms of I can cooperate. I can give cooperation the benefit of the doubt. I'm not arguing for groupthink in any way, shape, or form, but I am arguing for listening to each other. And that seems to take a little reading to help it. Can you think of anything else that is essential for somebody thinking about moving into co-housing?
Well, I think you're absolutely on point when you talk about the capacity to listen. And sometimes I think about the first 5 years of Nevada City Cohousing as a shakedown cruise. I mean, it's like, okay, we spent all of our focus on designing this project, on getting it approved, on building it. We're in it, and now what? And all of a sudden, we're faced with everyday kinds of questions that we have to decide in common. And from my point of view, you're right. There were people that moved into co-housing, let's say from 5 acres, in which they could choose to do whatever they wanted to do on those 5 acres. And all of a sudden, they had to take somebody else's point of view into account. They were no longer operating as separate individuals. They had to begin operating in cooperation with the rest of the community. Some of those people decided that they simply couldn't function in that kind of social atmosphere. But I'm remembering we had a flat piece of property that some people wanted to turn into a dog park. And other people had different thoughts about that area. Well, somebody just went in and put in a labyrinth. Now, it turns out people like the labyrinth, but that person did not ask anybody in the community whether that was okay. And of course, we have exclusive use area of a few feet in front of the house and a few feet in the back of the house. But the rest of the time, we've got to think about the community. Even when we put up a fence between myself and my neighbor, I've got to talk to my neighbor about it. Listening to each other is really important. Being flexible in terms of our decision making is really important. Considering alternatives that we might not have considered before. Asking ourselves, what will other people think about me doing this? I think that's a fundamental quality that people that are going to succeed in co-housing need to have.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And we moved in with people who were moving from 20 acres. We moved in with somebody who was moving from 100 acres.
Ah,
And certainly it was a concern of mine that we had a bunch of iconoclastic rural folk that might have trouble with it. And you're right, the shakeout played a role. And some people became, absolutely committed communitarians because they simply saw that it made their life easier, more convenient, more practical, certainly more economical, more interesting, more fun, more healthy, more safe, et cetera, et cetera. So, as a member of the co-housing for the last 20 years, Carl, what do you most appreciate about living in co-housing?
I think I appreciate the people. In some ways, yes, we're all oriented toward being communitarians, but at the same time, we're all different in all sorts of ways. And we bring all sorts of different talents and gifts to the community. I just treasure the people that I live with. This morning, one of our members sent out an article about another member who is a music teacher who taught a person who's become rather well known. I just, I treasure knowing my friend Lisa, who plays the harp and does all sorts of wonderful work in the community. But everybody has some kind of unique gift, even if it's almost just the gift of their being who they are. And to live in a community where I have daily interaction with all of these incredible people, I just think I'm in social heaven, so to speak. Most people would never get a chance to appreciate everyday human beings as human beings. I don't think we're all geniuses or, at the top of our profession or whatever, but I think everybody has a special gift to give. When I think about so and so, I say, I just love her. She just contributes so much to the community. Any place else, maybe you'd think she's just an ordinary human being, but here her gift to the community comes out. She shines. I feel that shining and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that I can contribute whatever I can contribute to the community. And people express their appreciation for that as well.
I appreciate that. I feel so lucky myself. And yet it's hard to know your neighbors in a regular single family house
Right.
neighborhood where 70% of Americans live, 65 to 70. Helps to have some practical reasons to talk to your neighbor. We have, like I said, one lawnmower. We have practical things to talk about. That's quite different than just pulling your car up into your driveway or even right into your garage. But where we live, people are walking 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 lineal feet to their house. I'll never forget Meg Polly when I asked her why did she move from close to the parking to far away from the parking, and she said, because my relationship with my neighbor is so much more important than my relationship with my car.
Yeah.
And that's pretty opposite of typical suburban dwelling these days.
Right. I would
Yeah.
agree with that.
But anyway, yes, Carl, I feel so lucky to know these precious people. And I'm sure every neighborhood is chock full of precious people, but you don't really know them in the same way.
Right. If you don't know them, how can you appreciate how precious they really are? And one of the things I realized about co-housing is even though I interact with these people on a daily basis, I still have the sense that There's so much I don't know about them. There's so much treasure hidden beneath the surface that I've only barely begun to tap into. It's really an amazing gift to be part of this community.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Being a co-housing resident for 20 years, how have I changed as a result of that 20-year duration? One of the things I've noticed, of course, I've aged. So I went from being 62 to 82. So as time has had its impact on my body, I found other ways to plug into the community. One of the wonderful things about co-housing is there are other younger members who have now taken up the slack where I can no longer function in a physical way. There are things that I still do that I can easily do. For instance, when the last dishwasher
Tanked.
tanked, yeah, I'm a member of the Common House Committee, and I basically started doing research. Okay, we want an under the counter dishwasher. It's got to be able to wash dishes in a minute and a half or whatever. And I found a dishwasher from a manufacturer that I know is known for dishwashers. And within 10 days, we had a new dishwasher. People look to me as someone who, if there is a need like that, I just go ahead and do it. And they trust me. The Common House Committee said, Carl, we need a rice cooker. Well, I've never used a rice cooker in my life, but they trusted me as someone who can do the research, order the product, figure out how it works, and make it a viable part of the community. I can do things like arrange with a contractor to get the parking lot resealed. So even though I don't do a lot of physical work, I can do things like that. And some of our oldest members, older than I am even, still contribute and find ways to be a valuable member of the community. And again, I really appreciate that.
I don't know if you know this or not, Carl, but there's no doubt that you are considered a sage elder in our co-housing community. Somebody that people feel like they can turn to, they can trust that whatever you're asked to do, you'll probably do it. You will do it. And that means a lot to neighbors. You know, somebody says, I can do this, I'm going to do this. And you actually get it done. It's just very impressive. And you set a standard where everybody wants to step up to that kind of a standard. And it's great. I mean, it really is. And in theory, that's what happens in a small town, in a village. There are elders who are around who can say, I can figure that out. And they do. And so, Carl, you really appreciate that level. But more than anything else, I want to say nothing is considered as helpful in having us age successfully than a little bit of purpose. And you step up to that purpose, and hopefully it serves you anywhere near as much as it serves everybody else because it does. And yes, I'm equally impressed with how many people step up to bring their talents to the table. So
Well, the other thing I'd like to say about our multi-generational co-housing is we go all the way from birth to death. And that's unusual, I think, to have people celebrate the arrival of a new member of the family. Our newest is now 7, 8 months old, who gets passed around at common meals. And at the same time, at the other end, when somebody dies, there is a ritual recognition of the passing of this person who has been an important member of the community. You know, we line up on our fire lane, sometimes at night with candles as that person's body passes by us. And there's this real sense that we are participating in the full spectrum of life from birth to death. And that is really important to me.
and I'm so glad you brought that up because there's so many opportunities in a village to live spiritual experiences. Our Day of the Dead ceremony, our midwinter labyrinth with candle lights, and especially that one that you just described, where when somebody passes, the whole community lines up while the person is taken from the site. It's just too amazing. Along those lines, last night we decided to get together with, I don't know, it was 10 households to talk about the voting issues of the day. Voting is pretty complicated these days. We had 60 candidates for governor.
Right.
And to be able to talk to your neighbor about it, can you imagine walking in your old neighborhood and say, hey, knock, knock, I'm getting all the neighbors together to talk about the candidates?
No, I can't imagine that at all. And in fact, you take me back to my childhood. Grew up in the suburb of Los Angeles, and this is back in 1949 through 1957. We had a real neighborhood. I knew my neighbors on both sides, and they were a real mix of people. We had people that worked in a shoe store. We had people that worked on the post office, people that were machinists, and we had block parties. Back then, I might imagine if I were a voter, I might have gone to my neighbors and asked what they think, but not in today's world. In co-housing, I think all of us share this common experience that we're living in a changing society and that change presents challenges for us. And we're not always sure what the best course of action is to take in response to those challenges. But being able to talk to my neighbors and say, who are you going to vote for governor? How do you feel about this particular proposition? That is a real boon to me to be able to see things through other people's eyes.
Yeah, I mean, what we did last night, the voters' education evening, it's just a natural extension of living in co-housing. We don't think about it. We just send out an email and boom, there's 10 people having dinner together on the common terrace to talk about voting. I'm not sure we got through everything, but we got a good start on it.
I just appreciate co-housing, and I am so glad that you and Katie created this amazing village community that I could be a part of.
Well, you make it, Carl. You and our other neighbors make it what it is. The contributions that everybody makes is what really makes it worthwhile. However, that said, the buildings have to set the stage just right. There's too many co-housing communities around the country where it's tenuous because the stage set is not convivial by definition. It's not centripetal by definition. So I'm glad that worked out. To tell you the truth, I feel like there's so much value in the residents playing a role in co-designing the effort. They bring so many values together, so many experiences together. Once they agree that indeed we're going to make this community accomplish a balance between privacy and community, then they do it, as opposed to the default behavior is privacy, privacy, privacy. And who knows if anybody actually wants community. I certainly tried that before writing the first book. Every developer I worked with said, no, you don't know that people want it. So people wanting it, coming to the table is the beginning of a successful project, no doubt about it. So thank you for being there from day one. Not to mention Carl and Ellen hosted me like 20 times while I came up here to deal with the city officials. Thank you so much, Carl. Anything else you want to add?
Well, from the standpoint of being 82 years old, I can kind of look back on my life and consider what are the choices that had the most impact on me. The first one was marrying Ellen. That was the most important choice I ever made in my life. And the second one was becoming a father. That certainly was a very impactful choice. And the third one was deciding to become a member of Nevada City Cohousing. I think that was a really important choice, primarily because as an introvert, I became a member of a community. And instead of thinking about just taking care of my own house and my own domain, I now had to think about how my life fit in with the lives of 34 other families and how I would have to coordinate my life and the things that needed to be done in the community with all those other people. And so my circle of friends and social connections became much more enriched by the kinds of interactions I had with the wonderful members of my community. So that's the third most important choice. The fourth one was deciding to become a teacher. So it's a really significant choice to join cohousing.
And you have an amazing wife, Ellen. I just think the world of her. And your kids are pretty extraordinary too. So to be right at their number 3 is quite an honor. Glad to hear it. And glad to have you as my neighbor very much.
Yeah, I love to have you, my neighbor. So
thank you so much for being part of this
thank
conversation.
you.
If this conversation resonates with you at all, please consider subscribing to this podcast, rating this episode, of course, sharing it with somebody interested in living in a sustainable neighborhood where people know each other, care about each other, and support each other. As always, you can find out more information about everything we discussed in this episode in the podcast description, along with our website where you can find books like Cohousing Communities, Neuro-Inclusive Community Design, Creating Cohousing, and others, the various events going on around the country, and sign up for our newsletter. And I want to give a thank you to our production team here at the Cohousing Company, Natachai Kongajorn Kitsuk and Melissa Turnbull. And until next time, I'm Charles Durrett. My email is charles.durrett@cohousingco.com. And thank you for being part of this conversation.